Hello, this is Bayne, and welcome back to my deconstruction series of Tim Baynes' lectures on the problems of other minds. And it's been a while since I left off the last part, so I might be sort of a bit out of the context. But let me do my best to get back on track to hopefully get further down in the deconstruction and possibly reach some end at a point. This is very, very long-winded and quite frankly boring, to be honest, right? This is the most boring deconstruction I have done so far, right? And Keith Frankis was a good competitor in that area, but this guy is really boring. He's incredibly dusty and gray, right? I sense no passion for this anywhere, right? Okay, let me head back into it and let's see how it goes.
First, in one's own case, in my own case, there is, it seems, a pretty strong correlation between experience and behavior, or at least behavioral dispositions. To take a simple example, my scratching is pretty much always associated with the experience of itching. It's not the case that in some times I itch because I scratch rather because I have a conscious itch. In other times I scratch because I'm in intense pain. In other times I scratch because I'm having a migraine or experiencing the taste of blueberries or can hear trumpets. Instead, for the most part,
yeah, it works because we can imagine people scratching themselves possibly could be suffering from itchiness, right? But it doesn't prove it. There is no, as you call it, one-shot interpretation. What's it called? What did she call it? One-shot induction, I think. That because you're scratching, you must have, yeah, but this is reasoning. This is not knowledge. This is not empiricism. Just because you're basing your reasoning on some kind of empiricism doesn't mean the results of those reasonings are knowledge, right? Because they're not based on in empiricism, right? So it's this switch. I would like to what's the word? Remind you that you should look for when people do this. It's very prevalent in certainly or in particularly in this discussion of knowledge, right? It's like I think that most people, and that includes philosophers like this guy and so forth, right? That they want everything going on in their mind to be knowledge except that which they consider purely their own. If they have feeling love for some person, they want to be alone with that love. They don't want everybody else to have the same kind of love, and they also don't want other people to sort of roam around in their mind and experience their love or something like that, right? And that's why there is a term like "I love you," right? Because the other person can't experience your love. They can only look at evidence that points in the direction. I'm not saying there's nothing bad about that. It's just a fact of how things. Should be a skeptical result of your dealing with your experiences, all what you lack in experience and what I mean. It's like it's this sort of connecting the dots kind of thing, right? Where it seems like, but I want to be able to say that there are other minds. So I'm convincing myself, and therefore at some point, so now I'm convinced. So done, right? No, it doesn't work, right? And the answers are quite simple, right? And I keep saying right at every sentence. And I'm listening back to myself, and I feel it doesn't sound too smart, right? Right. I can't help it. It's difficult for me. I don't even think about it, right? So right there was again, right? Right. So I guess you will have to bear with me until I have trained myself not to say it too often, right? right? I don't know. I actually not really sure why I keep saying it, because it's sort of not really necessary. And it also sounds a bit like I am begging for acceptance, right? It's like I'm begging for, right, right, am I right, right? It kind of sounds stupid to me. I'll try to do my best to maybe also talk a little slower and a bit less intuitive, maybe more sort of considered. You could say, and maybe from that would follow a lot fewer right at the end of the sentence, right? Right? Oh my God. Where was I? Okay, it's about knowledge. I believe that because people consider all sorts of things they want to be knowledge as knowledge, when they start to do epistemology, they're sort of, okay, I need this to be knowledge, I need that to be knowledge, I need that other thing to be knowledge, and so on. And then I'm trying to wrap the philosophy around that preconceived agenda about what they need to be knowledge, right? Right? So I guess I'll have to live with it, and you will have to live with my rights, right? It's hard to change. It's difficult to change. Change habits. Habits are very hard to change. It's almost, you have to, you know, you have to force yourself, right? And if I'm constantly trying to be aware of not saying it, I'm not being focused on saying what I actually want to say. So, but let's see how it goes, right? And this is free for you. You can watch as much as you want, and you can unwatch as much as you want. So it's not like I feel I have an obligation. I just want things to come across in the best possible way, right? But getting back to knowledge, it's difficult to find a way. I mean, the overall picture I'm sort of getting to is that, as I've said a lot of times recently, right? Your philosophy has to hang together, as I say, right? It has to. You can't pull out epistemology and then, mindfuck that into oblivion and think, aha, now I come up with some definition and knowledge, and not have done any metaphysics or any ethics that needs to fit with this, right? So when it's we said, if this particular aspect of philosophy and what you can philosophize about has been sort of disconnected from the rest, it's easy to come up with something that sounds like it works, but it hasn't been in function with the rest of what should be the complete picture of the philosophy. So it might be dysfunctional, but you will never get to it because it's sitting here alone and looking shiny and nice and so on, right? And it's like if you have a car and you're very interested in cars and car manufacturing, but you're only making wheels, right? And you are trying to make the best wheels you could possibly make. Yeah, you can make a set of wheels over there that are beautiful and shiny and looks great, but that doesn't mean it necessarily functions with the rest of the car, right? If somebody is making what's it called, the scaffolding of the car, so, and they might come up with something that is shiny and bright, but it might not function with those wheels, right? Everything has to function together. And that's why it's necessary. And the big problem in philosophy in general in these times, and it has been possibly for 100 years, that it has been fractioned into so many little niches of thinking that if you were a generalist on philosophy, in the mind of the average academic, that's like, trying to read, a million books or something like. They have to, and also science, everything, they have to know everything about everything, right? And it seems like such a daunting task that they're sort of, okay, I am, sitting here, mind-fucking panpsychism or something like that, right? So that's what it ended up, and nobody's getting anywhere because it's all disconnected, right? So, and one can get applause for saying they can't get to a mind, and at the next minute somebody getting applause for saying you can get to a mind. So, it's all, there's no coherence, there's no consensus, there's nothing. I can't spot it, right? Please show me if if there are any, right? And when you read about philosophy, it tends to also be some kind of historical presentation. There's this kind of thinking, then there's that kind of thinking, and this approach, and that approach, and this. They are presenting what other people have thought, right? And putting it together in some kind of, this is what is going on in metaphysics kind of thing, right? Rather than actually doing it yourself. So a show like his here, right, is a far cry from how I would like somebody to approach philosophy, right? It has to be general. You have to be a general philosopher. Otherwise, it can't be trusted, I would say, right? If you're not attempting to connect all the dots, so to say, or, I should not say connecting the dots. If you're not trying to start with a foundational dot and then taking one dot at a time until you sort of reach the end of what you can possibly philosophize about, it might be dysfunctional. It might be those dysfunctional wheels lying over there. They're looking nice and, I guess they're okay. But how would I know it's not fitting the car or it's not sitting on the car? I can't drive around and test it, right? So, yeah, let's get further into it.
There are exceptions, but for the most part, in ordinary context, scratching is a pretty strong indicator of the experience of having an itch.
Again, there's this pretty strong, right? All these fluffy descriptions he uses. That's dysfunctional, in my opinion, right? It's dysfunctional. It doesn't work. It's pretty strong. I mean, that's an opinion, right? It's not even really any kind of reasoning or argument. It's pretty strong. It's better than average kind of thing. Now, when they're dealing with knowledge and they're dealing with a hard problem and they obviously do not care to state any clear settlement of their metaphysics, and they're talking about it's pretty strong or something like that, right? I mean, your red flags or your red alerts should be ringing very strongly, right? I can't say that it's bad philosophy as that, although I would say it is, right? I mean, maybe that's... I can't refute his argument because it's based on this fluffiness, right? And that's also, when it's fluffy, it's probably because they want to manipulate you, right? Some way or another, whether or not they understand that they're doing it or not, right? Just because they look nice and sound nice and have nice clothes doesn't mean that you should take their whatever crappy argument they have seriously, right? And it doesn't mean that just because somebody's yelling or looks like, what's Quasimodo, that you shouldn't take that. I mean, it doesn't follow. The arguments should be analyzed from the point of view of the argument, right? You should look at the argument. How does it work, right? How does it work? It doesn't matter if it's this guy or some other guy, right? And me for that matter, I don't care. Oh, I do care, but it's not. I shouldn't care about who I am in presenting the argument, right? An argument is a fucking argument, right? Or a statement or a philosophy and so on. It is what it is, in the sense that it has to work by itself. You shouldn't be influenced by whether or not they call themselves professor or whatever. It's known as a fallacy, right? It's known as an appeal to authority or something like that, right? And mind you, there are hundreds of fallacies, right? There are so many ideas of how you can make bad arguments, right? So, I mean, and when you look at it, when you see how most people argue, it's usually infected with fallacies, right? Most argumentation statements are fallacious, right? And not alone in the sort of, in how the argument works, but also it's based on fallacious or missing metaphysics and screwed up ideas about knowledge and truth and objectivity and so on, right? So no wonder that I'm having a it's a smorgasbord of potential subjects to deconstruct, right? It's everywhere, bad philosophy, in my opinion, right? It's everywhere. All of it is crappy, basically. It's very, very close, right? Even those that I think is close to a good philosophy, they, the wheels come off at some point and they go crazy, right? So, just my point of view.
More importantly, the stability in what we might call my consciousness-directed verbal behavior. What I mean when I describe something as an intense feeling of sadness today, when I use that expression, a feeling of sadness today, is roughly the same thing that I meant 10 years ago when I used that expression, roughly the same thing I meant when I was a teenager and I used that expression. Of course, the focus here is intrapersonal stability. I'm focused here on my own stability in terms of the relationship, the correlation between experiences and nonverbal behavior or verbal behavior. And what we're really interested in is interpersonal stability that applies across people. Still, the fact that there is pretty robust intrapersonal stability between behavior and experience is, I think, worth noting. A second point to note, and more important, I think, is that it's plausible to suppose that experience is not merely correlated with behavior, but forms part of its underlying cause, that it's implicated in the mechanisms that gives rise to various kinds of responses, both verbal and nonverbal. Of course, it's possible that my behaviors have one kind of cause and yours have a different kind of cause. It's possible that my scratching is caused by a conscious itch, whereas your scratching has a purely unconscious cause, or perhaps is caused by a completely different kind of conscious state. For example, an experience that one would ordinarily associate with hearing trumpets. And if you were a completely different kind of being from me, then I think we would need to give that hypothesis serious consideration. But you're not a completely different kind of being to me. Or at least I've got no reason to think you are. Instead, you're a fellow human being that shares a great deal of my biological, physiological properties. And that background knowledge, the knowledge about the underlying...
He's still circling around this inference thing, because that's all he can do, right? It's the only potential avenue to try to convince you that he can say, okay, therefore there are other minds. It's never going to fly in this case, because in this way. Of course not, because he's basically saying if it's an inference, it is not knowledge. So implicitly, he is disproving what he's trying to get to. Otherwise, you should say, show you a picture of it, right? Or you couldn't even do that, right? But at least if you can't make a photograph of something, you can't experience it, right? If you if you are experiencing another individual, it's because when you open your eyes, there is an experience. So it's likely based on what the mind classifies as light, right? And light is something that can be photographed, because light is what, creates these pictures, right? So that's why the neuroscience is trying to put the camera on the brain and thinking that at some point there might pop out some mind there, right? That because it's likely that mind is going on inside the brain, and I would say that's good thinking, right? But it has nothing to do with light. The mind has nothing to do with light. It's not light, right? So you can't photograph it. You can never get to it, right? It's right. I keep saying right. I'm a little annoyed about myself and keep saying that. It sounds kind of stupid, right? Right? Oh my God. Bad habits. I have a sense it's this. If I just force myself to think that this is knowledge, then it becomes knowledge. And it's also an appeal to degree, I would say. If I can pile enough, it seems pretty. What was the term he used? Pretty good or something like that. Right? It was. If I have 5 pretty good, I can then say, okay, therefore mind, right? It's not. I'm not buying it. I'm really, really not buying it. In fact, I'm the opposite of buying it. I will be solidified even more in my own philosophy, if anything, right? It's. I think I will. I can't stand this guy. To be quite frank, he is awful to listen to, right? I mean, I'm just. 5 minutes ago, I was thinking, my God, if I was studying philosophy on the university and he would be my teacher, I would fucking kill myself, man, right? It's like, oh, man. Why are these kinds of people being funded? While those who actually have a passion for philosophy, they are kept out of the system, right? Because those who have a passion, they would actually want to make good philosophy. And maybe they will find out that taxation is theft, right? Or, extortion. They don't want that. Let's have some dusty old dude sitting there talking about, it's pretty nice this, right? I can't fucking stand him, right? Oh, man, he rubs me the wrong way. I'll get through this part and then I'll leave it there because I simply can't do it anymore. To be honest, I don't want to destroy my day. Okay.
Commonality between you and me with respect to biology and physiology, I would argue, licenses to reasonableness of one-shot induction. A third point, which builds on the second one quite closely, I think, is that not only is it plausible to suppose that consciousness and conscious properties are implicated in the causal structure of human behavior, there are also very plausibly selected properties that have been selected by evolution, processes of natural selection. You and I are related by descent from common ancestors, and as Elliot Sober pointed out many years ago in his paper, Evolution and the Problem of Other Minds, this provides further reason to think that there's broad uniformity when it comes to relationships or mappings between consciousness and behavior. So taking these 3 points together, and some of them have more force than others.
Yeah, of course you can reason or rationalize and say, yeah, when water is running from your eyes, it's likely that you're sad or something, you're crying, was it feeling bad or whatever you heard or something. That's good reasoning. But that doesn't mean you're proving anything. It doesn't prove anything. It doesn't get you to knowledge. Because knowledge is what you base that analysis on. The knowledge of the water, the knowledge of the face, right? You can upgrade that interpretation to a new set of knowledge, which is not based on empiricism. You're screwing around with bringing in, this guy said that 20 years ago. There's another guy over there. There's a woman over there who said so. So now I have four pretty much. Now four pretty much makes knowledge. Bullshit, right? Actually, I think I'll stop it here because I simply can't do it anymore. It's holy fuck, man, right? And of course, critics, if there are any critics of me and in this, say, hey, but you didn't do the whole thing, right? Okay. I feel like somebody telling me, okay, I am sitting on this log and I'm going to fly to the moon, right? And look at me, I'm sitting on the log. So I'm going to the moon. Yeah, right, sure. Good luck, right? And I will show you 4 more parts of my presentation tomorrow and the day after that and so on. And I'm like, no, thank you. Let me just say, no. I have better things to do with my life, right? Okay. Let's just say I'll leave it here and leave it up to you to watch the rest of it. I simply do not have the patience to go through this lecture series. It's like I will be feeling myself slowly dying or something like that, right? It's awful. It's awful, man. The state of academia is, man. This is what you get when it gets fascistic in nature, basically, right? Because when it's fascistic in the sense that fascism is when state and production, let's say companies, they are merging, right? When the state and the owners of the private sector are merging in order to control the workers, so to say. That's a simplified fashion here, right? But that's basically what fascism is, right? Fascism is the realization that complete communism doesn't work. Because you're just very few people who are sitting there making 5-year plans and everything goes to shit and nobody has enough toilet paper and so on, right? So it's better to say, yeah, you're free, but I have to control. I have to tax you into oblivion and so on, right? And when state and philosophy merges, this is what you get, right? This is a fascistic, in my opinion, kind of philosophy and academia. They are completely soaked in state government and financing and what you can say and what you can't say. Otherwise, I have not seen one fucking single academic philosopher being critical of the vaccines, for instance, right? Because they are in bed with the fucking government, of course, right? Oh, man. But instead I have to listen to 6 hours of this fucking dusty windbagging crap, right? Give me a fucking break, man. See you in the next one.